Hello, and welcome to Magic-Salish, a cursed conlang for the circus by Sachi. Okay, let's get into it. So, where, you might be asking? Well, it's spoken on an alternative Earth. This alternate Earth has some interesting features, such as there not being a lot of humans living on that planet, a giant snake in the sky, and magic stuff. On their little North American type continent, specifically where the Salish languages are spoken IRL, is where this quote unquote cursed lang is spoken. Now, you might be thinking, well, who speaks this? Most people and creatures that live in the area speak it, at least as a second language. The main speakers of the language are the quote unquote magical creatures and species, such as like fairies and mimics, if mimics can talk. Humans can speak it, but only a little bit actually can speak the full language because of reasons. Alright, now let's get into the more magical side of the language. Spells! Spells are a very big part of this language. It affects the vast majority of its phonology and also its phonotactics. Spells are treated as verbs when used in normal speech, such as, I'm gonna fireball you. And then, like, a fireball flies at the listener or something. All spells have the same root word, hey, and everything else gets suffixed on. Now let's get into specifics. Even though they're treated as verbs in the word order, they don't get affected whatsoever, like non-casting or non-magical or just non-spell verbs. And unlike the basic class verbs, which are the non-magical ones, they get mainly suffixed instead of prefixed. These verbs only work because the magic around the area likes to be called by certain stuff. Fire likes aspirated and prenasalized stuff. That's why Magic Salish only works in the Salish language area, which is also why its exonym is Magi-Salish, Magic Salish. Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty of it. Consonants, specifically talking about their manners and place. The place of articulation corresponds to the six bodily directions: tip, top, glute, freak, devil, and holy. Manner of articulation determines what type of magic it is. Changing it will make it hurt you, protect you, heal you, or gravity you. Want to stab somebody? Just use a fricative. If you suffix two consonants in between vowels, you get movement. It goes in the opposite order you say them in, chronologically speaking. For example, hetak would make a shield go from below to in front of you, whereas hetat would make a shield fly out in front of you. So the researchers didn't really know what co-articulation was, so they called it double articulation. Anyways, they categorized six different co-articulations, but really there's only five. Co-articulation: prenasalized slash aspirated, labialized, pharyngeal, lateralized, and palatalized. Each of these correspond to a different element. I'm not going to go over each one. The name kind of gives it away, so just look on screen. Voicing is how solid something is. Voiced consonants make the thing more solid, whereas unvoiced consonants make the thing more loose. And whether or not it's solid or liquid isn't distinguished verbally, but more mentally, so to speak. Finally, vowels. Unlike most other magical languages, tones and length do not affect the spell, but height, backness, and roundness do. The height of a vowel determines size, so if you want to hit somebody in the fourth dimension, just use an open vowel. There are three shapes you can choose from: trigonal, rectangular, and circular. The specifics on how long each side of the shape is comes down to mentality. Shape can be changed by changing backness and frontness. Finally, roundness. There are two kinds of roundness: rounded and unrounded. Rounded vowels make repetitive magic, which means the same thing happens multiple times, or there are multiple of the same thing. Unrounded vowels are considered slaptative vowels, where only one thing happens once. Combining vowels into dith and trithongs make 3D shapes. Similar to consonants, it goes into reverse order chronologically speaking, so the vowels o make a cylinder because two circular bases combined with a rectangular side make a cylinder. But if you get rid of the first vowel, you get cones because there's no base at the end point. And yes, you could add a fourth base. It would just make a 4D shape and would probably knock you out because that takes a lot of magic. Here we have an example of what a fight might look like. Notice how the fighter on the left has one consonant and one vowel, making a stationary object, whereas the right side fighter is using multiple consonants and vowels to make multiple cones of fire. So I'm just going to gloss over this. Everything on the left has an advantage over the element corresponding to its right. Any combinations not listed would have equal chance against each other. Okay, finally, time to actually talk about the real language behind these magic verbs. Magic-Salish, Magic-Sali, or natively known phonology, consonants. So the consonant table was too big to fit on the slide, so I split it up. Here we have all the plosive and fricatives. Here you can see how effective the phonology is by the casting verbs. Notice how there's no slot for aspirated consonants. Aspirated consonants are a unique feature of casting verbs where fire in this region like to be called by both prenasalized and aspirated consonants, but in the rest of the language there are no aspirated consonants. The only reason we even know this works is because of an unfortunate incident with an Anglophone researcher. And here we have all the affricates and trills. These phonemes are used in standard spellcasting, even though you could use pharyngeal affricates instead of uvular when spellcasting, so on and so forth. Vowels, there's a lot of them. Though it's not all of the vowels that exist, it's a good chunk of them. Also, the front vowels seem to be doubly rounded, which is cool, I guess. Okay, so I'm not gonna read all of that. The romanization is messy and hard to read, which is why most researchers nowadays just use the IPA. Unfortunately, the document where I got most of this information was started by an old-fashioned researcher that used the old romanization and then later picked up by a newer researcher who used the IPA. So half of it is in the IPA and the other half is in the romanization. And you can see in some parts where the new researcher added notes that the old researcher didn't have. Okay, phonotactics. So, root words all have mandatory consonants at the beginning of each syllable, with fricatives and trills that can precede them. The maximum amount of vowels can have is three in a row. And a consonant and a trill can cluster at the end of syllables. Now, this syllable structure can only apply to root words. Affixes don't have to agree with any of this, but they tend to be CVVC. Let's see. Ga becomes a glottal stop in between vowels, and dress is weird. Now some basic grammar. It's strictly SOV despite having cases. Everything pretty much goes after nouns except for numbers, which come before nouns, which is kind of different. Kinda. But otherwise, not that special, word order wise. Grammatical gender and verb classes. Like I said before, there are two verb classes, casting and basic. Basic verbs are normal and don't make fireballs appear in the sky. They also inflect for a lot more, but I'm getting ahead of myself. There are two kinds of grammatical gender, verb gender and noun gender. Verb gender affects mainly nouns, verbs, and adverbs with its three gender system, pleasant, indifferent, spiteful, not spiteful, spiteful. Noun gender is the obviously so very common two gender spiritual non-spiritual distinction. Noun gender affects mostly nouns, adjectives, verbs, and demonstratives and articles. Let's move on to some actual affixes now, starting with nouns and adjectives. Nouns inflect for case and number, both of which are prefixed and are affected by verb gender. There are four cases and six pluralities. The cases are dative, genitive, instrumental, and vocative. The pluralities are single, dual, trial, paucal, plural, and collective. Adjectives and demonstratives are inflected for spiritual and non-spiritual genders, with articles and demonstratives sharing prefixes. Also note that there are no suffixes. Most of Magic-Salish affixes are prefixes. Now let's get into verb affixes. I split up this part because the tables were too big, but most of the grammatical information is prefixed like most affixes. Notice how tense, verb gender, and noun gender are all encoded into one prefix. Also on this table is where you can see the second researcher added notes. And here are the moods. As you can see from the table, all moods are fused with indicative and subjunctive. Magic-Salish doesn't really do aspect, it just kind of is inferred for the most part. You could come up with some poetic way to say it, but usually it's just kind of inferred. Okay, so time for a bunch of miscellaneous stuff. Numbers. Numbers are counted in a base 7 system. Anytime a noun gets numbered, the noun gets put in the instrumental case with the appropriate number put on after. To not get into too much detail, I'm only going to talk about the multiples of 7. Numbers that are multiples of 7 goes as follows: number, 7, ku, number, if that makes sense. So 16 is really 14 plus 2, so it becomes pu bakar kupu. Literally 2 7 kutu. Also, let's get away from numbers because I hate math and let's focus on other stuff. All third person pronouns are demonstratives. The passive particle goes before the verb and agrees for all genders. Again, no aspect, has both definite and indefinite articles. Subordinate clauses are just kind of stuck on there. Conjunctions do kind of exist, but not really. They don't really use them. In the translation, they decided to use them to make it easier for the literal translation, and they just kind of usually use the words good and bad for when the second part of the conjunction is better or worse. That's when you just choose good or bad, and then you change the adjective to the new noun gender. Like, for example, I like my dog, but my fairy hates him. The but would become bad and it would agree for the magical fairy gender. Yeah, that's fun. And finally, third person pronouns are the only ones that are actually like consistent. Most pronouns are very irregular, but the third person ones are again just demonstratives. A lot of the plurality ones just have prefixes to denote the plurality. Well, okay. I think that does it. I feel like y'all understand a good amount of this slang that is cursed, so translation time! Also, this took me a long time to write and record, so forgive my mistakes. I had to do this quickly. It still took me forever. And don't worry about my mispronunciations. It took me a long time and I am not a native speaker, so here we go. Spukla, abri, ukas, agiai, bukla, abri, ukas, agayu, vu, avrakeyu, zwizi, unki roisi, hodzui, avrakeyu eu, ate, ra, nzandathi, ogospa, ntesub, unki roisi, agaklakas, hodzui, agraf, honti, grifle, thus, roi, aukro, rau, uku, uraibu, ad, hoti, aveburi, hodzui, rasaibu, honti, etegai, artsi hif, rasaibu, aprimbi, hodz, hrgunga, ibuobu, honti, hra, kyoko, bruvrakeu eu, artsi, adagiri. Bye!